everyone, and welcome to this month's LinkedIn Live. Our conversation today is going to be about the topic of how you can design for a culture of hope. And there is no better person to lead us through this conversation than the one and only Scott McGowan. Scott, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So, Scott, where are you coming from today?
From lovely Dayton, Ohio.
So as always, to all of our listeners here, please share in the chat where you're coming from. And also, as a reminder, this is in fact a conversation. So we welcome your comments, your questions. Scott is ready to answer those as we go through this. So as we're starting to hear from where people are coming from, I want to share with you a little bit about Scott's amazing background. Scott is the former CEO of McGowan Brabender, which is an incredible employee benefits company based in Dayton, Ohio. Recently retired co-chairman. He's the author of Culture is an Inside Job, and we're going to get to hear more about that. He's also the co-founder of Culture is an Inside Job podcast. And Scott has been a longtime podcast host, so I know that podcast must be amazing. He's the founder of One Morning, which we're also going to be talking about quite a bit, which this is an incredible organization that is so needed. It's a mental health engagement catalyst for companies, something that so many organizations are struggling to really effectively address rising rates of mental distress. And then most importantly, Scott is a wonderful human being. He is a husband for 37 years, married to the love of his life and to his best friend, Lori. He is the father to two beautiful children and also grandfather of two, soon to be three. And then finally, adamant believer in fostering love, acceptance, and vulnerability to bring life and hope to others. Scott, welcome.
Well, thank you.
So I want to share, we've got people coming in. We got MJ coming in from North Carolina. We've got Tiffany coming in from Dayton, Ohio. Lori coming in from Southern New Mexico. We've got someone coming in from Denver. So we got a range of people coming in. So let's start first, Scott, with your story. And, I think so often we hear leaders and we hear, people like myself advising leaders to lead from a place of vulnerability. And I think you are someone who really, really personifies that. And particularly because you are so open about your story. So why don't we begin with you sharing a little bit about what that story is?
Yeah, I had to learn the hard way. Looking back, sadly, I was pretty arrogant, pretty self-centered. I had this really warped sense of self. I thought self-worth equaled performance plus the opinions of other people. So in other words, your opinion of me meant more than my own opinion of myself. And then what I realized is the fact that I was just a scared little boy that never really grew up. And so I got to go back and maybe meet this 8-year-old little boy that used to like to draw and used to like to maybe write poetry. And I got to meet him again. And we got to maybe rebuild our life again. And I got to make amends for the mistakes that I made. And I got to apologize for a lot of the harm that maybe I had done. And then I get to use my past not to torture myself, but I get to use my past to be useful to other people. And I feel like, they say life's a wonderful teacher and she rarely gets an apple on her desk. So my job is to put a bunch of apples on people's desks.
I love that. And you really did do that. What I got to see when you were the CEO of McGowan Brabender at the time. So the story is that I first met you, I think it was in 2017. And it was a freezing cold morning. I think it was in January. And I was with Chris, my love of my life, my partner, my fiance. Someday we'll get married. But Anyway, he dropped me off, and I was just dreading going in. I don't know, it just looked like this sterile office building. And so I kind of gingerly walked across this icy parking lot, and I opened the door, and it was like this breath of fresh air. It was like walking into something I have never ever walked into before. This place lived and breathed a culture of hope. And from the get go, you came bounding out to greet me in a way that no CEO, no leader has ever greeted me. And you proceeded to take me on a tour of the company that you had helped to build in partnership with all of your team members there. And you really walked me through how you had designed for not just a culture of caring, a culture of high performance, a culture of health and well being, but really, truly a culture of hope. So walk us through that.
It really started with my father. So, we didn't even know we had a really strong culture until someone told him that one day.
Mm,
And so he had this belief that what he wanted to do is treat his employees the way he wanted his customers treated, which is super simple. It's not that complicated. And to really just give everybody a chance and to just love them for who they
mhm,
were in a loving, caring way. And as that began to kind of evolve, one of the things I'm a really big believer in for maybe everyone that's listening inside of a company is bring the five senses to life inside your organization. So, in other words, what people see with their eyes. So, graphically, like what you saw was imagery, and what you saw were like pictures. You saw the organization come to life with your eyes, with your ears, the stories. If you're a leader, you should be an incredible storyteller.
mm,
You should bring that imagination to life to people. What they can touch. So are there things inside the organization that you can touch? What you can and then what you can feel, what you can feel in your heart, and what you can feel in the heart are maybe the smiles from other people, right? Their attitude. Not, hey, there's a big customer coming in, so everyone has to behave. It shouldn't matter who's coming in. And then what we taste is ultimately maybe compensation, rewards, and then what we smell, not literally. What we smell, I believe, is motive.
mm,
When we first meet somebody, we're curious as why do you care about me and why are we talking? And if it's authentic, if it's in other words, I feel like you don't want anything from me, and it's authentic, then I believe that's when beautiful things happen inside of an organization. So when you bring those five senses alive inside of an organization, I just believe beautiful things happen inside of companies.
And I think, one of the things that really struck me, and I described this in the video that I shared yesterday on LinkedIn, was all these things that you designed for sight, touch, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, what we smell. I love this idea of like you can literally smell the motive. Is it authentic? Is it, or is it not? We can we can smell that right away. And I never thought of it being something that you smell, but it literally is something you can smell. But you really built a company that allowed people to pursue their dreams, not just at work, but outside of work. And the story that I shared was when one of your team members gave me a ride back. And in the ride back, she shared about how she was able to build a family because she worked at McGowan and Brabender, and how you supported her every step of the way in her Byzantine journey to adopting a son from Russia. So
Yeah.
just amazing that really speaks to the culture that you built. So in your book titled "Culture is an Inside Job," you really clarify about how designing for this culture that meets all of these different senses, as you so beautifully explained, is really starts in the inside, especially with the leader, but then translates to all of the individuals who are part of that culture. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, I think inside of an organization, and everyone kind of intuitively knows this, the leader's not on the top, the leader's on the bottom, right? And so what we're called to do is to lift and encourage people upwards. And if if we're trying to impress, if we're trying to, if a title is important to us, if we need authority, you should never have it. You should never have it. Um, and if you don't know who you are, in my opinion, because I've been there, you're dangerous. And I have this, I believe that the mirror is a beautiful place to find a friend. And so when you understand the inside of you, what encourages you, what lifts you, what motivates you from the inside, you have the power then to be an incredible leader, to encourage others, to inspire others, and to most often give people a reputation to live up to. Everybody's struggling with something, right? And that's your job as a leader.
This reminds me a lot of Douglas Conant, who famously turned around Campbell's Soup, in which he committed from day one to be tough on standards. So yes, we still need to be accountable and lead for performance, and at the same time to be tender-hearted with people. And truly, that is what I saw, was this tender-hearted with people, which gives permission to others to be able to do the same.
Oh yeah, like Tiffany's, she's on this live today. She worked for Disney, and so we met Tiffany, and she's an incredible person. And I was like, we got to hire her because we need some Disney inside McGowan Braybender. Brought that to life inside of MB. So she's a beautiful person, beautiful mom.
So really about providing the platform for everyone to really become their best selves. And when everyone becomes their best selves, then obviously that helps to lift up the entire organization. So again, to listeners, thank you so much for being here. Please pose your questions. And again, this is really about digging into the actual how-to on building a culture that really does provide a sense of hope for everyone there. So, one of the things that I want to start to dig into, Scott, is just how do we meaningfully tackle rising rates of mental distress, whether it's burnout, but on the more extreme level, rising rates of suicide, anxiety, depression. And I know that this is really the direction that you have now committed the rest of your working life toward with your new company, One Morning. Again, go to onemorning.com to learn more about this. But, one of the things that I see over and over again, and this is why I'm so happy that we're talking about culture, is that I see companies seeing mental health as a matter of fixing individuals, fixing broken individuals, as opposed to fixing the workplace itself. And what the research overwhelmingly suggests is that whether we're talking about burnout or any other form of rising rates of mental distress, this has much more to do with the workplace itself and the larger environment and culture that we are all navigating than it does with any individual within it. So how did you, in your role as CEO at McGowan Braybender, and how do you plan to now, as co-founder of One Morning, help organizations to really tackle mental health from a systemic perspective?
I think for a lot of us, when we think about going to work, we normally have our best clothes on. We have our makeup on. We bring our best selves to work. But sadly, what comes into a work environment is our kids are getting bullied at school. Our marriages are falling apart. Our mom and dads are going through Alzheimer's or dementia. We're sadly depressed. We're full of anxiety. We're afraid of our mailbox because we can't pay our bills. And so we're in this environment where we're taught to behave, and we're taught to be enthusiastic, and we're taught to be excited about a company goal, and we can't because we're broken.
Mm.
Now, as an organization, if you can bring a sense of belonging, because if you're an employer and you don't believe that those problems are coming in your front door, um, you're ignorant, because those problems are coming in your front door. If you embrace those problems and they are coming in your front door, and you give your workforce solutions towards those. So there's solutions like embracing the fact that you have an EAP and you have access to that, and really breathing into the workforce that that's confidential resources, or you can have individual coaching inside your organization. Or if you're a leader, one of the best things you can do is you can share where you've made your own mistakes, where you've fallen and tripped and fallen on your face morally, or where your family's made mistakes. And then what it does is it lets those people that are lonely, tired, broken, and afraid, it lets them all know they're not alone. And that sense of belonging inside the organization is such a beautiful thing for that to come alive. And I believe that's where hope starts. When I can look at other people and say, gosh, if they can do it, I can do that too.
And you know, when you talk about this sense of belonging, one of the things that I really saw is that that belonging, building a sense of belonging, was rooted in kindness. And we have MJ Shar, who is one of our guests here, and that's really become her primary focus, is really around fostering kindness, and deep kindness, not just a superficial kindness, but a deep kindness. And that's something that I really saw. You know, one of the things that I think about a lot when you're describing this mismatch between what we purport to be versus what we are actually feeling and what we are actually struggling with is I think about an article that was written shortly after the losses of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade. Here were two, as the journalist described it, inconceivably high performing individuals. And then the journalist went on to say, the line between our public selves and our private struggles is a treacherous one. And this is something that so many of us are struggling with. So what you're talking about now is really about how do you create an environment in which people feel that there's psychological safety for them to really come forward with their best selves, but also their struggling selves. But I want to push you a little bit more, Scott. And I want to talk a little bit more, not only how do we help individuals to deal with the issues that they may be bringing from home, but what do you do about those uncomfortable, awkward issues that are coming from the organization itself? So it might be work overload. It might be hierarchy, or it might be a lack of transparency. Like all these people are getting laid off, and people are worried, am I going to be the next one? And the leaders aren't being transparent about it. Or it might be about toxic leaders. So I want you to think now, especially with the organizations that you're working with, Scott, and when you see that happening, how do you have those conversations with those leaders about what's actually happening in their organization?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think what's really hard is the fact that they're just so afraid to be authentic.
Mm.
They're so afraid to be honest. You can tell, in my opinion, anybody, anything, if you're honest about it. But when you hide from that, that's where conflict comes. That's when it really starts to rear its head. That's where doubt comes in. That's where lack of trust comes in. That's where talking, like Laura, one of the things that I always hated was the meeting after the meeting. You remember that? Like you had the meeting after the meeting. Like,
Yes,
and
yes.
yeah, like we had an employee meeting, but then we had a meeting after the meeting. And by the way, like all those meetings, they don't have to be perfect. They just have to be honest.
Mm. Mm.
Conflict. We live in a world right now where addressing conflict is really hard and complicated for people. Right? Brene Brown talks about that in beautiful ways of how to be brave in having those conversations. And a lot of us have not been taught or coached in regards to how to resolve conflict. And you had mentioned somebody else that was on, and how to do that in a kind way, because truth without any grace is just mean. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And then grace with no truth is meaningless. So how do we put grace and truth together and bring that to life inside of the workforce? And it's tough. It's hard work. And
Yeah.
by golly, it should be hard work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see a lot is, organizations like I was mentioning before who have these kind of mystery layoffs or mystery firings, often people who've been there for decades and suddenly they're gone. And we have no idea, the rest of the workforce has no idea why that happened. So would you recommend that the leaders of organizations like that they be transparent about why these people were asked to leave?
I think to an extent, yeah. I mean, I think if there's information that you feel comfortable with disclosing, absolutely. And because we had this happen a while ago, where someone said, look, this is the end of the layoffs, and it wasn't.
Mm,
And and then you got to do it again.
mm.
That is a nick inside of your word. That's a nick inside of the organization. And I've always said that so often your brain's like a bad neighborhood, and you shouldn't be there alone. Do not leave people alone in their thoughts.
Mm.
Whenever you can breathe out to them. Do not leave them alone in their thoughts. We're all storytellers. We're all story makers. We will make up stories.
I love that. We're all storytellers and we're story makers because that's how we make sense of the world of our world that we live in. And so the more that there can be parity between the stories that people are making and the actual story, even if it's a tough story, the more people will feel a sense of belonging. And again,
I,
something, go
yeah,
ahead.
I saw a company one time. They had a town hall, and the town hall was you asked a question, you repeated the question, and you answered it. And they got a standing ovation if they answered the question with brevity and with raw honesty.
Mm,
And I was like, wow, you could ask anything. And the more succinct and the more honest the answer, the louder the applause. So it actually like breathe, like bring that honesty to life. Didn't mean you didn't like the answer, but the answer was honest. Does that make sense? That,
totally.
so much power in that. I was like, wow, that was
And
everybody's
they had created a system for that. So here's
correct.
how we're going to do this. We're going to ask you to bring your real questions forward, and we're going to respond to it with brevity and with raw honesty.
Yeah,
And if you hear that, then we want to. Then you can respond with a standing ovation.
that's
If I'm
great.
here for that's amazing. So one of the issues that I have been thinking a lot, especially in really starting to break down this rise in mental distress is, and also frankly in light of our presidential election, is the plight of men. And this is something that leaders like Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut has been talking about a lot, and it also echoes the work of Richard Reeves, author of Boys and Men: Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What We Can Do About It. And so, just a few of the stats we know, for example, that men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women are. Men are increasingly dropping out of work during their prime working years. Men account for 70% of the deaths by overdose. And we know that many men are struggling with loneliness. So talk with me about how do we address this plight of men?
Yeah, I mean, loneliness is the new epidemic. I mean, it's actually it has a higher mortality rate than smoking. Um, I can speak from my own experience is the fact that being a male, unfortunately, I spent a lot of my life talking to other males. I lived on the surface of the ocean, and we only went an inch deep because we were
Mm,
talking about the Bengals or the Reds, right? We didn't talk about the fact that maybe my son or daughter was being bullied at school. I didn't know how to deal with it, or I wasn't performing at work, and I didn't know how to get out of that, or maybe I was not in a good relationship with my wife, and I didn't know how to deal with that because we just weren't deep. We were never deep. I didn't have strong relationships growing up as a boy. I didn't have them as a man either. And what I heard through society is when I asked deep questions or I wanted to get deep, that was soft. And as a man, I was taught to be hard.
mm,
And to be honest with you, that almost cost me my life. So the birthing of my company one morning was one morning I wanted to die. And I asked God to take away the pain, or I was going to do it myself. And then by the grace of God, I found like this 8-year-old little boy again. And I got to go back and I got to restore my life again. So today, if I meet somebody and I'm another male and they want to talk about the Bengals and the Reds, I'll talk about that, but not for very long.
mm,
Because what I'm really interested in is a deep, compelling conversation. You know, that's what I'm really interested in connection because I know there's men out there and they're starving for it. And if you don't believe it, then just go stand in the mirror and look in your eyes, deeply in your eyes. And you like the person looking back. And the odds are most of us don't. And when you get to a spot where you like the person looking back and you can smile back in that face, then that's a beautiful place.
mm,
And that's where you should be. But that takes hard, compelling hard work. That takes love, that takes serenity, that takes peace. And that takes all of that stuff. It takes vulnerability. It takes all those things. And as men, sometimes um, we're just afraid to go there.
mm.
We shouldn't be. We should not. We shouldn't be. And I've seen relationships with women. They're not afraid to go there. And I don't know why men are afraid to go there. And it's sad. But maybe we can do something about it. By golly.
So really starting with those courageous conversations between men. And I want to highlight a comment here from MJ, finding ways to make kinder stories about each other instead of assuming the worst is a great step toward a culture of kindness and hope. MJ, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, Scott, you would agree with that. So I want to wrap us up with, first of all, in just a couple of words, what gives you hope, Scott?
What gives me hope?
Hmm.
Oh my gosh. What gives me hope? I believe deep down, everybody has a sense of goodness inside of them. Everybody. But either society has hardened their heart. And if we can be a little patient, and if we can be kind, if we can nudge them, there's just maybe just a little bit of a crack where we can maybe just crack that and maybe just love them a little bit longer. Um, and honestly, that's what gives me hope is the fact that in a world right now that wants to pick on each other, in a world that's decisive, in a world that wants to yell and scream, the fact that at our core, um, we're a loving society,
Mm.
and I believe that. And people might call me a Pollyanna. People often say I ride a unicorn every day. And guess what? I don't care. I don't care because today I can look myself in the mirror and I like the guy looking back, not in an arrogant way, in a healthy way, in a spiritual way. And I believe hope is the greatest thing on our planet. It's the strongest thing we can do is give hope to other people.
The strongest thing we can do is to give hope to other people. And even though we're at the very end here, we've got a question here from MJ. Is it society or the workplace that hardens our hearts most?
I think it depends on the workplace. I think the work there's beautiful companies that do beautiful work.
Mm.
Matter of fact, there's beautiful companies that doesn't even feel like work. And there's beautiful societies that do beautiful things, communities. So I think it can be both. And I think if you're brave, if you're in a terrible company, if you don't know who you are on the inside, then you can be destroyed by a company. You can be destroyed by a society. So you better figure out who you want to be.
Mm.
If you're in one of those companies, run as fast as you can. Get out of there.
So I want to remind everyone, first of all, thank you so much, Scott. I want to remind everyone that we will be reconvening on January 22nd, this time at 8 a.m. Pacific time, with Duke University professor of behavioral economics, author of 10 books, including the popular Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Behaviors. Dan Ariely will be our next guest. Scott, I cannot thank you enough for being our guest today. I think that you are our perfect guest for going into the holiday time. This is a time to be reminded of finding the cracks and the light that sneaks through the cracks. And I take great heart from your idea that at our core, we are a loving society. Thank you so much for that reminder. Thank you again to all of our listeners for joining us today for a meaningful conversation about building a culture of hope. Thank you so much, Scott. Bye, everyone. Thank you.